About the pedagogy of teaching pragmatic, besides the pedagogies mentioned above, teaching pragmatics through scenarios and role plays is also an applicable technique. Actually, a Japanese researcher, Takahashi, in 2001, displayed several situations that the students can use to discuss appropriate speech act language. They are request situations like making an appointment with a professor, extending the paper's submit due date, make up exam for a course, and requesting the professor to revise papers, and so on. He believed that through the situation variables, the request dialogues can be written according to students' selected roles. In the role play with scenarios, students can practice to use the appropriate language that convey their intended meanings and expressions of request. Besides gaining an opportunity of practicing that had been learned in class, I think that the role play is a relaxing way of learning that stimulates students' learning motivations for pragmatics. About the importance of pragmatics, in fact, although many approaches of teaching pragmatics has been provided and discussed, the importance of pragmatics has not been emphasized in a level that it needs to be emphasized. According to Casper in 2001, pragmatics has played a considerable role in the first and second language classroom research. But classroom research has played only a minor role in interlanguage pragmatics so far. From my perspective, I believe that the pragmatics needs to be taught from the very first year that language learners study a target language. Especially the issue of politeness and appropriateness need to be taught. My reason is that the language learner need not only to learn the language itself, but also need to notice the importance of politeness and appropriateness. That is, the learning both the language and the nice attitude of communication should benefit the language learners. Because language learners can achieve their communicative goal and fulfill their plan in international occasion only when they are able to interact in an appropriate manner and apply understandable language. About some examples of speech acts in request and receive. Speech acts of requesting and receiving might clearly and completely manifest several pragmatic issues, including the cultural gap, language differences among various social statuses, and different ways of showing politeness. I think another reason why this topic of request is important is because it is not easy for us to request the others and achieve mutual benefits for both the request and the listeners. The speaker might have to learn how to request in various countries and cultures, and then they can depend on the situation and select a proper request form. In fact, Bloom, Kuka, House, and Casper in 1989 also raised the awareness for the listeners and the speakers about the fate threatening to both the requester and the recipient in this study. He believes that the recipient might feel that the request is an intrusion on his or her freedom of action or even a power play. Accordingly, the English learner needs to learn how to be polite and appropriate when requesting the others. English learners need to save their face for both sides according to their social positions. Since a wrong form of request error obstructs a good communication between speakers, make the speaker appear to be abrupt or brusque in social interactions, and makes the speaker appear discourteous or apathetic. Therefore, the learning of request speech act is very necessary, because being outside the rules of language use or making a pragmatics may have various consequences. The following indicates the possible situation in request speech acts. Actually, the relation strategy is a significant issue in social context of language. A requester has to create the appropriate request sentences according to the language intimate, friends, acquaintance, and stranger situations. For example, the direct request sentence, such as, "Hey, bring me a cup of hot tea. I feel so cold now," can be employed when talking to the requester's friends, acquaintances, but not to a stranger or a new friend. Indeed, various types of opacity in request speech actually raise the complexity of request strategies. Without learning how to clarify the opacity, some request intention will not be figured out by the listeners. On the other hand, a person who made a request without using hint strategy may be considered to be a disrespectful individual. Among crucial elements taken into consideration in speech act of request and receive. Besides the strategies of request have been mentioned above, face, status, position, and imposition issues were also elements that need to be taken into consideration when we make a request. First of all, the face threatening is an element that maintains the confidence for both speakers and the listeners. Secondly, the consideration of the social status and the position are also factors of a successful and polite request. Thirdly, the status and position that attributes the power of language and the listeners in positions of doing things are also significant of a decent request. All in all, a pragmatic listener's familiar level on the issue and strategies of pragmatics accords with his or her intercultural ability. When a person is able to practice the strategies and issues of request learned, we can judge him as a person who can interpret the intention of a request speech and interact with an acceptable attitude in the intercultural situations without problem. About the conclusion of the pragmatic study, in conclusion, the learning pragmatics can be a very interesting and challenging experience. The student can learn a lot of expressions and interpretations in various types of intercultural speeches. English learners might feel interested in seeing many different types of conventions, strategies, and issues in different languages, places, and peoples. About the references that had been cited in this article, in 1996, the Bardoviholic, and Crystal in 1997, in 2003, House Gasper and Rose. Thank you very much for listening.